Spoiler warning before we start, if you haven't seen The Walking Dead in its entirety, I am pretty much covering all the big spoilers in the show, so be warned. If you've already seen it or don't really care, enjoy. I've been watching AMC's The Walking Dead for 10 years now. That's more time than I can entirely picture in my head. I was probably in middle school when the show first came out, and I was totally obsessed with it. There hadn't really been a series that did justice to the zombie apocalypse genre up until this point, and I think it came at a really good time. However, as the show continued to grow and extend over its now 10 seasons, I have slowly fallen out of love. Yeah, a lot of this is due to the fatigue from the zombie genre, but also The Walking Dead is just kinda bad now. I mean, this is just my opinion, and I don't want to change your mind about something you love, but it really feels like The Walking Dead missed out on the opportunity of being immortalized as a perfect show. So today, I want to talk about what made the show so good in the first place, where it went wrong, and how it could still be fixed and end on a perfect note. Sit back, grab some popcorn, and let's talk about The Walking Dead. It's no surprise that The Walking Dead was one of the biggest TV shows in history. Back in 2010, zombies were literally everywhere. At the time, with probably every 20 movies that came out, you had at least one apocalypse film in there. I mean, it's a great way to show the struggles of mankind, forcing characters of different backgrounds to come together and learn how to survive in a brand new world order. The Walking Dead Season 1 is probably the best example of this we had, because rather than having to cram every story arc in one movie, we finally were able to see the full transition of the old world to the new in the span of 6-hour-long episodes. Not to mention, the writing was exceptionally good. Having our lead character wake up from a coma at the start is not only a great way to introduce him to the fall of mankind, but also the audience could learn about everything alongside him. Survival stories practically write themselves, because it's easy to connect to a character's motivation when it's solely primal instincts. But I think at its core, The Walking Dead went above and beyond with setting up more arcs for their characters than you would typically see in an apocalypse story. Rick had to deal with the fact that his best friend had been sleeping with his wife because she thought he was dead. Daryl Dixon has a beautiful story that goes from being a racist asshole to literally everyone's favorite character. And then you've got Carl, who's an annoying little brat that is forced to grow up a bit too fast. Notice a trend here? Instead of making each storyline directly focus on the looming threat of dead people trying to kill them, every plot line is easy to relate to, and honestly they could work in any other context that could have nothing to do with the zombie apocalypse. But you see, that's just what made The Walking Dead so groundbreaking. It wasn't the fact that there were undertones of horror at every corner, but it's a story of a group of average and vastly different people trying to survive while still dealing with their relatable problems. But as we have all become accustomed to, everything good has its end. I think that a lot of the cause for The Walking Dead's fall from grace is directly correlated with a problem that I see in tons of other shows that have great first seasons. The only way to keep an audience entertained and make the show feel bigger than before is to raise the stakes. This isn't inherently a bad thing. I think that a lot of sequels actually thrive off of this idea. For example, the original Star Wars was a simple story about a farm boy wanting to leave his home on a big adventure. And the reason why Empire Strikes Back worked so well is because it took the same idea and values of the first and turned the consequences up a notch. In the second season of The Walking Dead, they kind of raised the stakes, but in a lot of ways they also lowered them. Over half of the season is set in one location, the farm, so it seemed like there was less going on than the first. Don't get me wrong, I still think Season 2 isn't terrible, but it was also the season that shot them in the foot. Audiences were craving more from the show and felt like there wasn't enough going on in Season 2, so the showrunners knew that from now on the bar had to be set higher. This is the right way to go about things, but there's also a fine line between making situations more intense and making scenarios feel a bit too ridiculous. Let's skip ahead all the way to Season 4. There's now a dude with an eye patch ransacking a community of people living in a prison, and characters are dying literally every episode. The show has become less about people trying to survive, and more about how crazy and wacky it can get during the apocalypse. No longer are we focused on the characters' day-to-day struggles that are easy to relate to, but now it's all about building up to the biggest battles imaginable. I don't think this season is bad. I actually used to consider this to be my favorite season, but it's also paving the way for just how incredibly dumb things are going to be in the future. At the end of season 4, Rick and friends are kidnapped by a community of cannibals, and we get this huge cliffhanger that makes us question whether or not they're all gonna make it out. Another question we are subconsciously left with is how the producers are going to make the next season bigger than the last. Now, with that in mind, let's skip all the way to season 10. Now they are fighting a group of survivors dressed as zombies. The original group is hardly recognizable, and more importantly, it's almost impossible to relate to the scenarios that each character is experiencing. Picture the difference between how things were in season 1 to now. It's not a story about a ragtag group of regular people trying to deal with their personal struggles anymore. It's a show that is soaked in meaningless fight sequences and disposable characters. Speaking of which, in season 1, I could probably name every single character and everything they are going through without a hitch. You've got Carol, who's a sweet woman stuck in an abusive relationship, then she develops to be strong and able to fend for herself. There's Dale, an old man projecting his past mistakes on his friend Andrea, who wants nothing to do with him. Now in season 10, I could probably name about 5 of the over 50 characters that the show wants us to care about. Here's the problem. One of the biggest draws to The Walking Dead is the fact that anybody could die at any time, no matter how instrumental to the story they could be. Just take a look at Shane, Rick's old best friend who was hooking up with his wife. We all thought he was going to stick around for a long time, but his story ends in a perfectly morbid way at the climax of season 2. The showrunners recognized that people react positively to killing off big characters, but if they kept going, they wouldn't have anybody left over to keep the show alive. There's an easy solution to this, right? Add more characters to kill off. Wrong. This is hands down the biggest misstep that The Walking Dead has taken. Here's how they handled this situation. Say you have 10 characters that you have grown to love since the beginning. Every time you lose one of them, you gain 3 more new ones. Then once they die off, you have another 9 characters to keep track of. See where I'm going with this? At its current season, there's only 2 characters, Daryl and Carol, that were from season 1. 2 characters that were part of the reason why we fell in love with this show in the first place. But they aren't alone. In the span of the whole show, all 10 seasons, there have been over 50 main characters. Of that 50, there's only 20 still alive in the show. How are we supposed to feel connected to any character if we know they're just gonna die before the end of the show? Between the last 2 seasons, I have felt no feelings towards any of the new characters at all. Even before then, it was hard to consider any of the newbies an actual part of the group. Part of this is the fact that we already know they're just gonna die, so why should we care? But also, they just aren't as relatable anymore. Take Glenn, who started in the series right at season 1. Out of all the characters, he was the easiest to relate to because he's just an average guy. While everyone was dealing with their ridiculous problems, Glenn was just a pizza delivery driver who was lucky enough to find a group to look after him. We got to see his growth from this average-looking dude to a real team player all the way up until his death in season 7, episode 1. Which, by the way, even though I don't really care for this season, it's definitely the best episode by far. That's besides the point. Skip ahead a few seasons, and now there's a character who makes everyone call him king, and he owns a zombie-eating tiger. You see what I'm getting at? I think I'm the last person to say goofy stuff like this is an inherently bad thing, but it feels like poor taste and honestly pretty tacky when everything else is pretty grounded considering the circumstances. Okay. Enough bashing a show that's already had its fair share of criticism. Now, I think that The Walking Dead still has a chance to redeem itself. They recently brought on a new showrunner, and I honestly think she's done pretty good with cleaning up the mess from the last few seasons. So there is still hope here. What needs to be done? Well, best case scenario would be to invent a time machine and end The Walking Dead around season 5. I think one of the biggest moments that shot them in the foot was revealing that Eugene didn't actually have a cure to the apocalypse, because it left people without any hope towards a happy ending for our favorite survivors. So option number 1, keep most of the first few seasons intact and end with the discovery that it's possible to wipe out all zombies with some airborne chemical thingy. It's pretty outlandish, but I don't think it's so ridiculous that it wouldn't work. Option 2, conclude with everybody dying except for Carl and a few others, and leave where they go to next open-ended. I think it would make sense for Rick to die instead of Carl because it works for his character arc, and having everything left open-ended would leave audiences with a hopefulness towards the future. Obviously, it goes without saying that these 2 options are impossible to pull off now, but in a perfect world, maybe they would have worked. So what are we left with? We have an almost completely new cast of characters aside from a few. At this point in time, have Eugene actually figure out a way to wipe out all the walkers. It would be a perfect irony for the fact that he lied about it in the past, so it would only make sense that he would be the one to figure it out. Then bring back Rick because for some reason he's still alive, but instead of a happy reunion, make him the final boss. Rick could return with a new group and perspective, and it would be the only way to see this story ending on a more surprising note. After a huge battle between our heroes led by Negan against Rick's group, only a few survivors would be left over to pick up the pieces and rebuild the new cured world. I know this is pretty extreme, but hey, desperate times lead to desperate measures. Although I don't agree with the majority of choices in The Walking Dead, no matter what, it's always going to be in the history books as one of the most important shows of all time. So much of its inspiration can be seen in new shows that are out today, and I'm still hopeful that it will find its footing and end on a high note. But what do you think? Do you like the direction that The Walking Dead is in now? If not, how would you end the series? Make sure to let me know in the comments down below. Thanks a ton for watching. I know this video is pretty different than what you're used to seeing from me, but I just felt like I had a lot to say about it, and I definitely would love to hear your thoughts as well. If you want to see me make more videos like this, make sure to leave a like to let me know. Also, we're getting pretty close to 2,000 subscribers, and I would love it if we could hit that milestone by the end of April. So consider subscribing. As always, keep gaming, or I guess keep watching to the fullest, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.